Hello and welcome to another video from oorail. In this video we're going to show you how we go about purchasing road vehicles for oorail layout. So stick around and you'll find out exactly how we do it. Okay, so before I go into too many details, you can actually find an article that accompanies this video over at oorail.co.uk. I've put a link as a card and it's also in the description as well. So you can click on that, you can find not only this video, but you can also find some useful information and some of the talking points that I've put into the video as well. There's a little bit of extra detail and some extra examples and explanations and some photos, so hopefully you guys will find that useful. So definitely go check that. Okay, so how do we select road vehicles? So the first thing we need to consider is the time or era that we're trying to model, right? So if you're trying to model, you know, the late 80s or something like that, you'll want some vehicles that might be from the 80s. You might want some older vehicles that were from the 70s, maybe even the 60s. Obviously, vehicles from, you know, later, so like the 1990s and so on, they wouldn't be suitable because obviously they hadn't been invented yet at the time you're trying to model. So, so basically the first thing you need to figure out is when am I modeling, and use that as a kind of a starting point to figure out which vehicles you need to buy. The second thing you want to do is consider the condition of the vehicles. So for example, if you've bought a car, and you know, we'll keep it our 80s examples. If it's the mid 1980s and you've bought a kind of a classic sports car or something like that from the 60s or 70s, you're more than likely going to take pretty good care of it. It's going to be kept in a garage, it's going to be washed pretty regularly, it's going to be maintained pretty well. So it's going to look a little nicer than, say, someone's banger that's been beat up and kind of heavily abused and used and kind of rusted out over the years. So when you look at the age of the vehicle, it's sort of like, is this going to be a newer car? Is it going to be an older car that's been well taken care of? You know, who is the target kind of audience for the car at the time? And so that'll give you an idea of, you know, what kind of condition the car needs to be in. The other thing to keep in mind too is the location. Depending on where you're trying to model or the sort of locations you're going to park the cars. So whether it's like it's on the street or whether it's like beside a restaurant, is in a petrol station, is in a parking car park of you know, a railway station or something like that. You need to kind of figure out, well, what kind of vehicles are going to be there. Obviously, if you're you know, modeling a post office, you might have some Royal Mail vehicles. You might have some customer vehicles as well, and so on. So just kind of an idea of kind of consider the location as well. You know, if you've got some sort of rundown alleyway, someone's not going to probably park their fancy Mercedes-Benz in that. But you might find a few beat up bangers or someone's Ford Fiesta or something like that parked there. So it's just something to keep in mind, you know, when you're kind of trying to figure out what vehicles to buy. Another thing to keep in mind with the location is that some of the buses and the commercial vehicles are location specific. That doesn't mean you can't buy them if they're on bargain or something like that. You can always repaint them or modify them or so on. But it's just something to keep in mind that you may want to kind of research the delivery and stuff to make sure that it still fits with your layout. Okay, so once you've figured out where, when, and kind of what you're looking to model, then you got to figure out, well, what vehicles are suitable, right? So some of the vehicles, so for example, the Classix from Pocketbond actually have the information stamped on the boxes. So for example, this is a Ford 100E Popular. It's two-door. It's in beige, and it was the model year is 1959 to 1962. Obviously, it can be later than that, but obviously not before that, since, you know, the vehicle wasn't produced. Now, Oxford Diecast have some fantastic vehicles. Unfortunately, there's less information on this. This, for example, is a Ford Escort XR3i. So if you're familiar with Ford Escorts, you might know when this particular model was produced and so on. If you're not familiar with it, you're going to have to Google it. Some of the vehicles, it's not always obvious, and sometimes it's not very clear. So there's got to be an easier way to figure out if a vehicle is suitable for your layout. Plus, you might not want to buy it ahead of time, right? You might want to be doing some research on Hattons or Kernow or something like that. So I'm going to go and tell you exactly how we go about purchasing vehicles and figuring out if a vehicle is suitable. It's quite easy, actually. So what we do is we take a look at the number plate. So one of the coolest things about the UK is there's a couple of different number plate systems they've used over the years, and with the exception of the early two systems, the rest of them all give you the year that the down to a 6-month window that the vehicle was registered. So you can get the number plate information straight off the car. And the cool thing is, most of the photos that I looked at on Hattons and Kernow and other websites, you can actually read the number plate off of it. So it's quite easy to go in and look at the number plate before you go and buy the vehicle. So like I mentioned earlier, we have an article up on oorail.co.uk, and it kind of describes the various systems in detail. But I'm going to show you some examples and at least give you an idea of how to read it and so on. So the first one I'm going to start with is actually one of the vehicles I had that just happens to have the original license plate information on it, sorry, number plate. I've been in America a little too long. So the number plate here is 3442NC, and so this is an old style number plating system, and it was introduced in 1903 and it ran till the mid 1930s. And basically it ran either forwards or backwards, so it could be 2 letters and 4 numbers, or 4 numbers and 2 letters. The 2 letters, I believe, denoted the area or region where the vehicle was registered, and then the numbers ran from basically 1 to 9,999. And when they ran out of numbers, it was a problem. So, in fact, when they ran out of numbers consistently, they introduced a new system, which was kind of built on top of the old one. And so, here's an example of the new system. You can see it there. And basically, what the new system involved was an old 3-letter, 3-number system. So, you had 3 letters. So this one here is EGL 292. So the E and the 292 were unique to the vehicle, and they were incremented in serial, so like they were incremented one after the other. So for example, you would have E292, E293, and so on. And when you got to E999, it then became F1, and then F2 and F3, and it went to F999, then it went to G, and so on. The GL that's on there indicates the again, the area identifier, the kind of region or office location where the vehicle was first registered. So keep in mind, this is only where the vehicle was first registered. They got the number plate there. If the vehicle was sold or moved around later, that was obviously a thing that could have happened, and they would kept the license or kept the number plate. One thing to keep in mind is that you don't really have to worry about the 2-letter code matching the area that you're modeling. You're more likely not going to do that. There are some companies, I think Scale Model Scenery, for example, I think sells printable license plates that you can kind of print out and edit and use on your vehicles as well. So you could change it, and I guess if you're modeling a specific area, you might see more frequently some of the same prefixes, but vehicles get bought and sold all the time, move around, people move. So it wouldn't be unusual for you to see different, region number plates in different locations. One thing to keep in mind is this particular format, the 3 letters and 3 numbers, it's up to 3 numbers. So for example, if this was number 1, it would be EGL1, it wouldn't be 001. That's just something to keep in mind. And likewise, if it was 20, it would be EGL20, not EGL020. Another thing to keep in mind is that classic cars that are registered today can still get this style number plate if they're from that era, and those re-registered vehicles use ASL 100 through YSL 999. So if you see a license plate that's ASL 100 all the way up to YSL 999, it's a more modern classic car. So for example, you wouldn't use a vehicle with that number plate if you're modeling the 1940s or 1950s. Moving along, it's like I mentioned in 1963, actually this is another example of the system from the 1930s through December 1962. This one is JAS 240. So J and 240 is the unique number to the car, and the AS is the location where it was registered. If we move along, hopefully this car has the right, yeah. So the next system was introduced in January 1963, and it ran till July 1983. And basically, it was a three-letter, three-number with a suffix letter, and the suffix letter denoted the year. So it started with A, which was 1963, and it ran until Y, which was 19, or I think it was like August. Sorry, it was August 1982 to July 1983. So Y would have been August 1982 to July 1983. It looks like in year E, which was I think 1967, it ran only until from January until July, and then they started doing it in the 6 month, or so started doing this August to July rather than January through December. I'm not quite sure why they changed it, but that particular year in 1967, E and F, E was a shorter January to July, and then F was August 1967 through July 1968. So this is another thing to keep in mind. The cool thing with this though is that I can look at this number plate and know exactly by looking at the letter H there at the end what 6 months or year period that it falls into. And then obviously from modeling before that, the car is not suitable. For modeling after that, I just need to figure out how much after that and what kind of condition the vehicle will be in. Is it going to be new? Is it going to be something someone collected? Was it an older person that maybe didn't drive it as much and kept good care of it? Exactly what would this vehicle look like? Moving along, the more modern system used a prefix system, and I believe that's the suffix system as well. So yeah, this one here is also suffix. So for example, this one here is the Escort that I showed earlier, and it's RWX295W. And so I know that Y was the last year, so W is there in the early 1980s. Let me see if I can find a vehicle. I think this vehicle has the yeah, it does. This one here has the prefix system. So if you look at this particular vehicle, this is a pretty cool, I think it's a Rover SD1 3500 in Metropolitan Police livery. So pretty slick. So this one has a license plate of, if you can read that, it's A152SUW. And so the prefix system was introduced in August 1983, and it ran until August 2001. And basically the A, which is the prefix letter, the letter at the start, that denotes the year. So A is August to I think July 1983, 1984. The UW at the end is the area identifier, so it identifies where the vehicle was first registered. And then the 152S, so that's the three numbers and the letter, that's a unique identifier to the car. So the A is the most important part, because the A tells us this particular car was from August 1983 through July 1984. So anytime after that it would have been useful, or anytime in that particular year. So if I'm modeling 1982, probably not going to work for me. So you can take the same approach with these commercial vehicles. This is actually a pretty slick forklift. It's in BR Crimson livery. I actually got two of these. It's actually a really nice vehicle. I got the one in the later BR livery as well as this one. Now this one obviously is a little older because it's in the British Railways livery. You can see it's got the British Railways logo on it. If you look at the license plate on the back here, it says LLU 748. So we know it's got 3 letters, 3 numbers, and this one's the SD freight lifter. So we know the 3 letters, 3 numbers, it's going to be somewhere in that December 1962 or earlier up to the the mid 1930s. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the first two systems, the 2 letters, up to 4 numbers, and the 3 letters, 3 numbers, like this one here, they ran sequentially. So while you're not going to know exactly what year it is with the older systems, you can kind of get a vague idea, right? So the LU is the region, and then the L748 ran sequentially. So we know that it ran probably up until I think 1963-ish. So if the numbers are a little bit higher, so obviously it's not A1, for example, it's kind of halfway down the alphabet, it's probably a little bit closer to 1963 than it would be to the mid 1930s. Obviously, if you want a more exact approach, you might need to do some research on the model and see if you can find any photographs, or find on Flickr, for example, or if you can find when they started manufacturing the vehicle. But kind of ballpark, you'll get an idea of whether or not it might be suitable or not. So obviously this is British Railways era, and it's probably sometime in the 1940s and so on. The same thing goes for the other commercial vehicles. So for example, this one here is GNB 492. It's a little older style looking rubbish truck, or garbage truck if you're here in America. So this one actually has some information on the side of it. This one's actually from, I think, Manchester. So obviously the style or make model might not be specific to Manchester, but the livery is. So if you're not modeling the Manchester area, you might want to consider either weathering this up or repainting it or whatnot to make it fit in with your layout. So you're gonna have to do a little bit more research on the actual livery of the vehicle itself, see if it's suitable. Likewise, just some common sense stuff. So for example, this is a Texaco truck here, and its license plate is 299 GLO. So obviously that's the same old 3-letter, 3-number system, so before 1963. Now, if you're going to, say, have a petrol station, which is why I mentioned the location earlier, if you have a petrol station, maybe it's a Shell petrol station or a BP petrol station, you're probably not going to have a Texaco tanker, sitting in its foyer or in the beside the pumps, filling the place up, or anything like that. So you're going to go and probably want to either run a Texaco station if you're modeling some scenery, or you just want to put it on the road or something like that. Now finally, I want to have a quick discussion about buses. And the reason for that is they're a little bit trickier because they have different liveries. And while the make and model of the bus might be applicable, even the license plate might be applicable, you might need to do a little bit more research on the actual livery of the bus to see if it's suitable for not only where your layout is, but also to make sure that it wasn't replaced at some point in time. Okay, so I want to give you a quick rundown on buses. So there's a couple of different companies that do buses. First of all, Rapido Trains, I think, are getting into the bus business as well. I saw a video of theirs. I'll put it in the description. It's kind of cool. Their Chinese factory with the buses. They're doing, I believe, either a Metropolitan or an Alexander. I can't remember which one it was now, but it's pretty cool. It looked like they were going to a lot of trouble, so definitely worth checking it out. Now, these buses can actually be super expensive. These things can range anywhere upwards of about 34 pounds, which is, in my opinion, a little bit crazy for something that's just static, that sits on a layout. So what I usually do is I wait around until Hattons have a sale or something like that, and you can pick these things up almost as cheap as like 5 pounds sometimes, 9 pounds, and obviously you take the VAT off of that, it gets even cheaper if you happen to be lucky enough to be outside the UK or Europe. So we can use the same technique to figure out when a bus was actually first put into service. This one, for example, is KHU 316P, so I know that's a Suffolk license plate. So it would have gone into service sometime between January 1963 and July 1983. If I look up the P on the chart, it'll tell me the exact kind of year that went into service. And now the livery here tells me it's a national bus. This little logo here is the national bus logo, and then Bristol tells me it's for the Bristol area. Prior to the national bus, I believe it was Bath services, and it serviced the Bristol Bath area. And this one's got a slightly older license plate. It's got the 3 letters, 3 numbers, so PHW 920. Now you may have run into a time where you could have seen both liveries in the same area as they changed things over and so on. Here's a newer bus, and this bus has a license plate of KJD 268P, so it's a more modern bus. Again, it's probably, I don't know off the top of my head now, but it's probably like late 70s or so. So this particular bus is in a Go Whippet livery. So what you need to do is do a quick bit of research by Googling Go Whippet. Sometimes using Flickr is very helpful. They have lots of groups on there with different bus groups and different just kind of regular transport groups. So searching those groups or Go Whippet will get you some pictures, and you can sort of see when certain liveries were introduced. So for example, you might see one livery was introduced in the late 70s, and then it kind of was replaced maybe in the mid 80s and so on. So that'll give you an idea of when you could place that bus on the layout. Sometimes you want to make sure that buses were specifically used on specific routes with that particular branding. So for example, there was one bus I looked at that I thought about buying that I think was called on a service called Borough Lines, and it was not really suitable for what I was trying to do, and I didn't really want to, it wasn't too cheap to warrant buying it and then repainting it. So stuff like that's kind of helpful. You can do a quick bit of research and see if it fits in. The cool thing with buses is buses pass through a lot of areas, either on their way to depots or just part of their normal route. So if you go and you look at the bus and it's something that might be seen or would have been seen in the area, whether it's stopped there or not, then it's a good candidate for your layout. One thing to keep in mind is several of the buses that they sell are actually kind of prototypes or sort of showcase, I guess, liveries. So for example, this one is pretty cool. It's a Metropolitan livery, and Metropolitan was a manufacturer. So this one tells you this is the Metropolitan Super Quiet Bus. Again, it's got a license plate of NVP 533M, and so again, it would have been in that 1963 to 1983 kind of range, and you can look it up on the website and the article to know exactly when. This, however, has the bus of the future, written on it, and so what you're not going to do is, this bus or in style of bus would have been in service for quite a few years, but they wouldn't be calling it the bus of the future when it was towards the end of its life, or had been in service for like 5 or 10 years. So this particular livery is kind of going to be keyed down to maybe the first couple of years that those buses were in there, where the company was basically using this bus as a means to showcase and so on. Likewise, you can have other liveries. So for example, this one is Trathens, maybe? I don't know, someone can correct my pronunciation of that. But again, this one has a license plate of NVP 533M, so it looks like the nice folks at Britbus use the same license plate, so might be a good candidate to rework the license plate there, since they're supposed to be unique to the vehicles. So you can see there, obviously, they may have used the same printing and just stamped it on the same bus. So to some companies, I think Scale Model Sceneries do downloadable license plate numbers that you can print out and put on your vehicles. So that's worth checking out as well. So these particular vehicles, if it doesn't suit your layout, you can always repaint them. A lot of these Metropolitan buses were used in different liveries all around the country. All right, so that is it for today's video. I think I've rambled on enough about license plates and liveries on vehicles. hopefully you found this useful. If you've got any ideas or suggestions, or maybe you have a different approach to identifying what vehicles you should run on your layout, if it's suitable or not, please put it in the comments below. Might help some folks out. And if you found this video useful, please go ahead and like it, share it, and do whatever you want with it. Like I said earlier, we have a article which kind of has more details and some examples. So go check that out. I'll leave a link in the video here, as well as in the description below. Alright, so that's again it for today. I hope you enjoy the video, and until next time.